Welcome, guys. So, this is the first proper start of this YouTube channel. As this is the first video, there might be some problems with the audio and the presentation, but I will try to improve this as we go on, so you don't have to worry about that. And the rest regarding the contents of the chapter, you don't have to worry. We will give a detailed description of the chapter. So let's start. So today we will study the class 6 history NCRT book. We will start with the first chapter, that is what, where, how and when. So at the start of the chapter there is Rashida's question. So here Rashida is wondering about how did people get to know about the events that took place, suppose 100 years ago. How did we know of events that took place in the distant past? So in this chapter we will find out the answer to this question. So in the next section, that is finding out what happened, it says that if we want to know something that happened yesterday, we listen to the radio, we see watch the TV and read the newspaper. If we want to know about something that happened, let's say the last year, then we ask our friends or family. But what about if you want to know about something that happened 1,000 years ago, or say 500 to 1,000 years, or even back? So we will see how it is done in the next sections. In the section after that, that is what can we know about the past? Uh, it talks about various things that we know about the past. That is the kind of the clothes that people used to wear, the type of food they ate, and the animals they hunted, if they are herders, that is animal herders or farmers. We also find out about the rulers, the merchants, priests, craftspersons, artists, and so on. We also get instances about the games played by children, the stories they heard and the songs they sang, all these. So these indicate the social and cultural aspect of the society so long ago. Then let us continue. We see in the next section that where did people live? Now there is a map on page 2, that is map number 1. It points to the Narmada river. So the Narmada river is over here. You can see this here in the central India. Here is the Narmada river. So it says that people have lived along the banks of this river for several 100,000 years. So people have been living here for a very very long time, that is close to 100,000 years and more. Now these people that lived here were primarily hunter gatherers. They hunted animals in the forest and gathered the forest produce such as fruits, leaves, and all the other things for their survival. Now, next that we see is the Suleiman and the Kirtar hills to the northwest. Now, in the same map, if we see to the northwest in the day Pakistan region, there is the Kirtar and the Suleiman hills. I have underlined these portions so you can see properly. So over here we see that the first instances of agriculture is shown in the subcontinent. That is around 8,000 years ago people started growing crops like wheat and barley over here. And these people were also rearing animals like sheep, goat, cattle and lived in villages. So we see that there is a example of a settled lifestyle over here. These people were farmers, they were agriculturalists, and they also had tamed animals, they reared animals, sheep, goat. They got the milk and the wool from these kind of animals, and they lived in settled villages. That is, they did not move around, like hunter-gatherer people or nomads. Then it says that locate the Garo hills to the northeast and the Vindhyas in central India. Now, if you see the same map, the Garo hills are located over here, that is in the northeast region, and the Vindhyas are here, that is in central India. This it sort of divides India into the northern and southern part like this. So in the central India there are the Vindhya hills. So these are some of the areas where agricultural developed. These places where rice was first grown are to the north of Vindhyas. The farming of rice was first practiced to the north of the Vindhyas, that we see in this overall this area, that is the Indus Ganga region. Traces of river Indus trace the river Indus and its tributaries. Tributaries are similar to smaller rivers that flow into a larger river. So it says here to trace the river Indus. We can see that this portion is the river Indus and including its tributaries. Now, most of the Indus River lies in Pakistan, but during that time there was no, the Pakistan there wasn't there. So it was in the country of Indian subcontinent as a whole. The river, the tributary rivers, that is the Jhelum River, the Chenab, Ravi, the Beas, and the Satluj. All these rivers joined together and formed the Indus. About 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities flourished along the banks of this river. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the banks of the Ganga and its tributaries and along the sea coast. So, this part, that is around 4,700 years ago, it talks about the cities developing along the river Indus, that we know that from the Indus Valley civilization. So these are the instances of the cities that were part of the Indus Valley civilization. And then later, about 2500 years ago, we also see that cities developed along the bank of the river Ganga and its tributaries and along the sea coast. That is, around the later date, we see that cities started developing along the river Ganges, about this part, and on the sea coast, this part. Then we see that locate the Ganga and its tributaries called the Son. So the river Ganga is over here, as you can see in the marked green marked region, and this is the river Son. That is, it comes from central India and mixes with the merges with the Ganga. You can see on the map. In ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as Magad, now lying in the state of Bihar. Its rulers were very powerful and set up large kingdoms. Kingdoms were set up in other parts of the country as well. So we see that in this area, that is to the south of the river Ganga, this part was known as Magad. As you know, this part is currently in the state of Bihar. Now its rulers were very powerful and they set up a large kingdoms. Now this talks about the several kingdoms that rose up in the Ganga Valley region. You know about the 16 Mahajanapadas. Now Magad was one of the most powerful of these 16 Mahajanapadas, and it sort of established a large kingdom in this area. Throughout, people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to another. The hills and the high mountains, including the Himalayas, desert, rivers, and seas, made journeys dangerous at times, but never impossible. So men and women moved in search of livelihood, also, as also to escape from natural disasters like floods or droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies conquering other lands. So these talks about the movement of people from one part of the subcontinent to another. Now the reasons of this kind of movement was because to for the search of livelihood or to escape a natural disaster, like floods or droughts. Sometimes the men marched in armies conquering others' lands. During the war time, we see that armies, professional armies or just temporary armies were used to conquer other lands. And beside these, there were also merchants who traveled with caravans or ships carrying valuable goods from one place to another. So, this is how the commerce took place in the ancient time. And religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by a spirit of adventure, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All these led to the sharing of ideas between people. So the main thing here is that we see the different kind of travels now by also by religious teachers who ventured from village to village, town from town, teaching their philosophy. And some people were just going for the sake of adventure, the spirit of adventure, that is wanting to discover new and exciting places. Now the main thing is all these led to the sharing of ideas between people. So as you see that as people, due to different reasons and different types of people, moved from suppose one place, say from here to here, that we see that with people there is also a transfer of their ideas, their beliefs, their religious thinking, their practices, and so on. So we see there is a sharing of ideas from one place to another. So let us continue to the next part, that is why do people travel nowadays. So from the previous paragraph that we studied, we can easily answer this question that there are certain differences for the reason that people travel nowadays, but overall the reason is still the same. The primary reason being livelihood, you know, that is a search of livelihood that we saw over here, a search of livelihood. And some people we see that, as we saw in the case of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, that people migrated from places to escape a natural disaster. These kind of pandemics and floods, disaster, people move from place to place, all these. And also for commerce, we still see that people going from one city to other to trade, set up their shops and start a business and so on. Now let us move on. Look at map 1 once more. The hills, mountains, and seas from the natural frontiers of the subcontinent. While it was difficult to cross these frontiers, those who wanted to, those who wanted could and did scale the mountains and cross the seas. People from across the frontiers also came into the subcontinent and settled here. Now, if you look at this map, we see that if we look at the frontier regions, that the Pakistan Afghanistan region to the west, and suppose the northeastern region to the northeast, also the northern Himalayan region, we see that all these regions are quite, the terrain of these region is quite hostile. That is, there are steep mountains, mountain passes, the weather is also very adverse. So these features make travel a lot more harder. So people generally did not travel that often through these areas, but we see that many people who really wanted to, go from one place to another, they did frequently use these routes. As you see that in the case of many of the invasions, of the Indian subcontinent, most of them came from the northwestern part of India. There are several mountain passes over here. The terrain over here is very treacherous, but still people, risk their life and for a better future in the Indian subcontinent. And these outsiders, they traveled through these areas and came to settle in the Indian subcontinent. Next, we see that people from across the frontiers also come into the subcontinent and have settled here. These movements of people enriched our culture and tradition. People have shared new ways of carving stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundred of years. So we see that all these movement and settling of outsiders in the Indian subcontinent created a unique mix of different cultures in the Indian subcontinent. These different cultures contributed in different ways to the overall development of the Indian culture. That is, some people shared new ways of carving stone, making music, cooking food, different types of industries, different language and social religious customs, and so on. So let us continue to the next part. Names of land. If you see the names of the land, that is, two of the words we often use for our country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus, called Sindhu in Sanskrit. Find Iran and Greece in your atlas. So this is the exercise you can do. If you have an atlas at your home, you can just open the map and locate the position of Iran and Greece. The Iranians and the Greeks who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago and were familiar with the Indus called it the Hindos or the Indos, and the land to the east of the river was called the India, as you see here. The name Bharat was used for a group of people who used to live in the northwest and were mentioned in the Rig Veda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, dated to about 3500 years ago, and later it was used for the country. So we see that how did the name in India and Bharat came about. That we see that in the case of India, we find that the Iranian and the Greek people who came through the northwest around 2500 years ago, as we saw in the map, that from these areas several Iranian and Greek settlers came to the Indian subcontinent. Now these people were, you know, when they reached the river Indus, they they called it. They could not call it in Sindhu. Sindhu is the Sanskrit term for the river Indus. They call is they called it the Indos. Here we can see they called it the Indos. Here it is the Hindos or the Indos. This is what they called it, and from this word we see gradually the word India takes shape. And they actually, the land to the east of this river, land to the east of this Indus river, they called it India. Now, they reached till this river, and the land towards the east was known as India, and this river was called Indus. And then for the name Bharat, we can see that it was actually mentioned in the Rig Veda for a group of people, a tribe that used to live in the northwestern region. That is, let's say in this overall region they used to live, and these people were known as Bharat. So from there it is mentioned in the Rig Veda, and from there the whole country was later called as Bharat. So let us continue to the next part. Finding out about our past. So this is the next portion. Now before we continue, we can see that there is a picture and it says that a page from a palm leaf manuscript. This manuscript was written about 1,000 years ago. The palm leaves were cut into pages and tied together to make a book. To see the bark manuscript, turn to page 35. So this is a palm leafed manuscript. We see that in earlier times, when formal paper that we use nowadays was not invented, people used to write on such palm leaves. They were dried and these were written on. And if you see the picture, there are two holes in the sides. Now these were used to stack up a bunch of these kind of palm leaves and make a sort of a book with them. So this is how a book was made in the earlier times. So let us continue. Finding out about the past. There are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search for and read books that were written long ago. So this is one way to know about the past, is to read the books that were written, in the era that we want to learn about. These books that were written a long time ago, these are known as manuscripts. Because they were written by hand, this comes from the Latin word manu, meaning hand. So why are these called as manuscripts? Because these were written by hand, and this word manuscript is actually comes from the Latin word manu, meaning hand. These were usually written on palm leaf like we saw in the image, or on specially prepared bark of a tree called as birch. Now remember this name. This is the name of the tree. Its bark was used to write manuscript. Now, this tree grows in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects, some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all kinds of subjects, religious beliefs, and practices. The lives of kings, medicines, and sciences, besides were epics, poems, plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit and others were in Prakrit, languages used by ordinary people, and Tamil. So this part talks about the condition of this manuscript over the years. As these were written on perishable material, that is, they were all degradable. So we see that over the years, some were eaten by insects, some were destroyed by fires. But we also see that many have survived. Many of these old manuscripts are now stored in several temples and monasteries and some in libraries. Now, the content of these manuscripts contains several things such as religious beliefs, practices, lives of kings, medicines and sciences, so on. Also, there were certain manuscripts which dealt, just solely with epics, poems, and plays. The most famous, as you know, is perhaps the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Now, the first, when these were all written, they were all in the form of manuscripts, written on the tree barks and such. Then they were later on printed and so on. So the language of these manuscripts was mainly in Sanskrit, and the others were written in the Prakrit. Prakrit is the language that was used by the ordinary people. The Sanskrit, as you know, is the language that was mostly used in religious texts. It was known by the Brahmins, and other than Brahmins, many other people did not know about, did not learn about Sanskrit. So the language used by the others was the Prakrit languages. And also it mentions here that the Tamil, in southern India, it is one of the oldest languages, and we find many manuscripts written in this language. We can also study inscriptions. These are writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stone and metal. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read, and obey them. There are other kind of inscriptions as well, where men and women, including kings and queens, record what they did. For example, kings often kept record of their victories in battles. So we see another form through which we can learn about the past other than manuscript is known as the inscriptions. Now these were written on hard stone slabs or hard stone surfaces or a metal surface. These were basically generally contained the order of a king, so that people could read them, understand them and obey them. Or sometimes it also contained details about the victory that a king won in a battle, let's say, or suppose a king donated a piece of land to a temple or to any other person. So these kinds of things were recorded in these inscriptions. Now if we see that there is a picture over here. Now this picture is an old inscription. This inscription dates to about 2200 500 years, or 2250 years, and was found in Kandahar. So this inscription was found in the Kandahar region, that is present day Afghanistan. It was inscribed on the orders of a ruler named Ashoka. Now we will read about Ashoka in the following chapters. Uh, you should know that Ashoka is perhaps the best known Mauryan ruler. He had a very large kingdom in the Indian subcontinent, perhaps the largest kingdom ever seen in the Indian subcontinent. When we write anything, we use script. Script consists of letters or signs. When we read what is written or speak, we use a language. This inscription was inscribed in two different scripts, the languages, that is Greek top, Aramaic below, which were used in the area. So we see that the written form of a language is known as the script of the language. And in this particular inscription, this is a Ashokan inscription, we see that the upper part is this part. This upper portion is written in the Greek language. If you zoom into the image, you can see the difference. This upper portion is written in the Greek language, and this lower portion, if you notice carefully, you can see the difference in the scripts, is written in the Aramaic language. So as we see that this inscription was found in Kandahar, and it might have been that the people living in that particular place, they spoke two different languages. So King Ashoka, carefully printed his orders, that is on the inscription, in two languages, that people from all different sections who spoke Greek as well as Aramaic could read his inscription and understand what he is saying. This is a peculiar feature, a very interesting feature of the Ashokan inscription. We will read about all these inscriptions in the following chapters. Then we will see that the next part, that there were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. They study the remains of the buildings made of stone and brick, paintings and sculpture. They also explore and excavate, that is dig under the surface of the earth, to find tools, weapons, pots, pans, ornaments and coins. Some of these objects were made of stone, others of bone, baked clay or metal. Objects that were made of hard and imperishable substances usually survived a long time. So we see here that in this paragraph it talks about the who are the archaeologists. That is, the people who study these objects, who study the objects of the past, they are called as the archaeologists. They study the remains of buildings, old buildings, we can see old sculpture or such old manuscripts or inscriptions that we find under the surface. These archaeologists, they dig up the surface and they find different things. And to dig up the surface is called as to excavate. They also find different tools, weapons, pots, and ornaments and many such things of daily use in these excavations. Some of these excavations are, also carried out on old burial sites, and these old burial sites contain different kinds of items, and archaeologists, they get to know about the different, things and the type of society that were back then from the things that they dig up. So if they find metal weapons, tools, or pots, pans, ornaments, so they can say that a certain type of metal, let's say gold, copper, iron. Now these weapons or instruments were used in that time. If they find such evidence of such instruments in the dig site. Next, it says that objects that are made of hard and imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Now we see that during the excavation, the objects that are made of, let's say, metal or a substance that does not decompose very easily. Now these are generally found in such excavations, because if there is any perishable material or biodegradable material, let's say, so these just quickly decompose over a few years, and after, let's say, archaeologist is digging 1,000-year-old grave site, he will most likely find metal objects, let's say metal or pots or pans, these kinds of things. He won't find any, let's say, if there was any food that was placed in the grave, he won't find those, because those have already decomposed long years ago. So let us continue. In the next section, you can see the several pictures of the pots, and there are old silver coins that were found 2500 years ago are given. So these are the kinds of things that are found in the excavations. As you see that the archaeologists dig them up, and if they are broken, they try to fix them and display them in the museums and for the public to learn. Now this particular pot that we see was used about 4700 years ago, and this is the picture of the, towards the right we see a picture of old silver coin. These type of coin were used around 2500 years ago. Next, archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds and fish to find out what people ate in past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If the seeds of a grain or pieces of wood have been burned, they survived in a charred form. Do you think cloth is found frequently by the archaeologist? So we see that the archaeologists, when they are digging at the site, they also look for bones of animals, or birds or fish to find out what the people used to eat in those times. As we see that the plant remains and other such biodegradable materials, they are found very rarely because they decompose very easily. So after 1,000 years, the chances of finding such remains is quite low. Other than that, if let's say a piece of wood or pieces of grain are having burned, they might survived in a charred or a charcoal form. Now the archaeologist and the scientist will have to study those, to find out what they actually were in when they were not burned. Historians, that is scholars also who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from the manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. So, historians and archaeologists are like detectives who use all these sources like clues to find out about our past. So we see that historians and scholars, they, while studying the past, they look for sources. Now these are the different kinds of sources that we talked about. The manuscripts are there, the archaeological inscriptions are there, the bone remains, and pots, old coins, all these different kinds of sources. So this is like piecing together of a puzzle, that we gather different sources and we get to know about the socio-economic condition of the past. So it says here that historians and archaeologists are like detectives. We use all these sources to find clues about our past. So the next section, it talks about one past or many. Did you notice that the title of this book, Our Pasts, we have used the word pasts in the plural to draw attention to the fact that past was different for different groups of people. Now this is quite important. We see that here it explains that why the name of the book is Our Pasts, now with an S, because the S is particularly there, that is the past is in plural, to draw attention to the fact that the past was different for different group of people. Everyone interpreted different things differently, and the lives of different people in the past were different. So it talks about this here. For example, the lives of a herder or a farmer was different from those of a king or queen, and the lives of merchant was different from those of a craftsperson, and so on. Also, as it is true even today, people follow different practices, customs, and in different parts of the country. So we see that throughout our history there have been certain differences in the cultural and the customs that are followed in different parts of the country. So this is true in today's time, and this was also true in the past. For example, today most people living in the Andaman Islands get their food by fishing, hunting and collecting forest produce. By contrast, people living in the cities depend on others for supply of food. Differences such as these existed in the past as well. So we see that different people that live in different areas such as the Andaman Islands, or let's say a group of people who are living in the cities, they get their food from different sources. Now this is true if we look at the past, that is, let's say a island dweller or a forest dweller, they got their food in a different way as compared to, let's say, a settled farmer who farms wheat or barley, or keeps herds of animals. So their sources of food was different. Beside, there is another kind of difference. We know the great deal about the kings and battles they fought because of the records kept of their victories. Generally, ordinary people such as hunters, fishing folk, gatherers, farmers, or herders did not keep record of what they did. While archaeology helps us to find out about their lives, there is much that remains unknown. So we see that while reading history, we get to know about the different deeds of different rulers and kings from the different records, manuscripts, and inscriptions of their victories in battles, of the their deeds of building temples, giving lands, and so on. But the ordinary folk, that is the rest, farmers, agriculture, these hunter gatherer, the craftsperson, merchants, these people generally they did not keep any such record as such. So many things about their lives is still it still remains to be known. Now the next part is, what do dates mean? Now this part talks about, if somebody asks you about a date, you will probably mention the day, the month, and the year, 2000 and something. And these years are counted from the date generally assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. So 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. So 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. All dates before the birth of Christ are counted backwards and usually have the letters BC, that is before Christ, added on. In this book, we will refer to the dates going back from the present using 2000 as our starting point. So, as we see that when we see the dates in the past, or in the current dating, we see that the days that are marked are start from the birth of Christ. Birth of Christ is taken as a central point, and the events that took place before the birth of Christ are marked using BC, that is before Christ, and the events that took place after the birth of Christ are known as CE, or the Common Era. Uh, so in this book they say that we will refer to dates of the past starting from the year 2000 as our starting point. So from the year 2000 as a reference point, we will look at the dates of the past. Now it says about the letters with dates. It talks about, as we said, that BC stand for before Christ. You will sometimes find AD. Now, after Christ is also denoted by AD, that is Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. So the 2000 year 2012 can also be written as AD 2012. Anno Domini means in the year of the Lord. Lord, that is Jesus Christ. Sometimes it talks about CE is used instead of AD and BCE is used instead of BC. The letter CE stands for Common Era and BCE stands for Before Common Era. So these are the terms that we use nowadays, that is CE instead of AD, and we see BCE, that is Before Common Era, instead of BC, Before Christ. Um, in India, we began using this form of dating from about 200 years ago. That is, we see that from the colonial time, this kind of AD and BCE, all these dating system, they started. Also says that sometimes the letters BP, meaning before present, are used. So this is also another nomenclature for the past, that is BP, before present. So here we come at the end of the chapter. Here some exercises are given and some keywords are there that we see. We will read the keywords and do the important dates. You can practice all these exercises on your own, and if you have any doubt you can write it in the comment section. So let us just revise the keywords and then we will end the video. The keywords are traveling, that is we learned about the people traveling from one part of the country to another. Next is the manuscript, that we saw are the old written records on old tree barks and palm leaves. Next is an inscription. So we saw that inscription is a message written on a stone surface or a metal surface, that is basically a hard surface. Then that we see, there is archaeology, that is the study of the past remains, digging up burial sites. All these things fall under archaeology. Historian is a person who studies history. Basically they find out about the different events that took place in the past. Next is source. Source, as we saw, is a source of knowledge. Through them we learn about the past events. Next is decipherment. Now this word decipherment, it means to decipher. Let's suppose that something is written in an ancient language and we do not currently use that language, or we know about that language. So if we try to decode that language and try to find out its meaning, that is known as decipherment. Okay, so let's go to the important dates. So we see the beginning of agriculture, that is 8,000 years ago. The first cities on the Indus, that is 4,700 years ago. Cities in the Ganga Valley, a big kingdom in Magadha. So all these took place around 2,500 years ago. And the present, that is about 2000 AD or CE. The present, that is, it means according to this book, the present time is now near about 2000 AD or CE, plus minus a few years. No, for now it is plus few years. So students, we now come at the end of this chapter. If you had any doubt or if you did not understand any part, you can write in the comment section. I will gladly help you out, and please give your feedback on how to improve the video or what do you want to explain more in the following chapters in the comments, and hope you liked and understood this video. So please like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm starting a new YouTube channel, and this small liking or subscribing will help me out a lot. So uh, so let's end the video, and I will see you in the next video when we will read the next chapter. Thank you.